What's going on, my friends? As promised, we're making a video talking about how we got Max's bench up as his most lagging lift. In competition last weekend, Max benched 457 pounds, and then in training the following week, he hit 475. Speaking generally, I find that bench is the most difficult lift to reliably peak on the platform. So rather than the usual save it for the platform approach on bench press, myself, most of my athletes, Max, we generally try to over prepare within training and then just take something within our capabilities. And we find that's on average the best way to assemble a total reliably rather than aiming for a perfect peak on the platform. Usually there's going to be a long press command. Your stomach's going to be upset. You maybe didn't drink enough water. The bench you're benching on is worse than what you used in training. Something will often throw off that ability to reliably hit your all-time best on the platform, in my personal experience. So for full power guys, usually we try to over prepare. That being said, Max's worst lift through the majority, if not all of his training career has been his bench press. And recently, we have put together several training cycles of PR after PR after PR, and I kind of wanted to talk about what we did to do that. But we're going to start out with a little bit of a story of Max's training career. Max started lifting seriously when he was about 11, 12 years old. I mean, actually seriously. Of that, 7, 8 years, I coached him probably for 7.5 of it, whatever the hell we're saying, minus about, I don't know, a couple months where his training was handled by my friend Winston. Aside from that, I have lived with Max, I have coached Max, I have watched and trained with him in person, as well as written the program. So I think I've got some pretty interesting insight as to why Max was not a good bencher before and how we've kind of started to reverse that. So pretty early on, let's say Max was pre-puberty, early puberty, I don't know. And I think it's pretty common to struggle with increasing the bench press in these phases. It might just be a lack of testosterone and inability to put on relevant musculature, making the bench a little harder, whereas maybe the squat and the deadlift are a little bit more neural and technique dependent, so we can actually increase those a reasonable amount pre-puberty. So Max saw this initial success on the squat and on the deadlift, right? To the point where, let's say he was about 12, 13 years old, he had a very good squat and a deadlift for a 12, 13-year-old. That is not that high of a bar because there's not that many 12, 13-year-olds that are truly training seriously on what I would consider a reasonably well-written plan. So that was a pretty low barrier of entry, but Max started to see himself be good at something for the first time in his life. Max never really excelled. I guess up until that point, Max didn't really play many other sports seriously. I'm sure he would have excelled, but he didn't. So he had not seen himself succeed in a physical endeavor up until now. So he really started pouring himself into his training. And I can vouch for Max that Max has trained his ass off for many, many, many years since he was about 12. And he started seeing real success within his powerlifting training. Then he, let's say, he hit puberty and he gained some weight. Max caught me in body weight when he was about 14 years old. He's just been a big guy. And this led to more success on the squat and deadlift as he just became a bigger dude who was training to lift seriously. Then by the time he was 14, 15, he had a very strong squat and deadlift for a 14, 15-year-old. This carried on when he was 15, 16, very strong. 16, 17. Well, now 18, 19, he's got the biggest in-competition deadlift ever done by a 19-year-old. So he's kind of been very good for the age category, all the way from like 13, 14 on up in the squat and in the deadlift, but not so much in the bench. And I think to some degree that was a self-fulfilling prophecy because he didn't see that initial success. He started not thinking of himself as a good bencher, so he didn't adopt the habits of a good bencher. He didn't prepare as well for his bench days the night before, thinking about it, making sure he gets all his food, going to bed early like he did for his squat and his deadlift days. He didn't go watch a million videos like he did for the other two. He didn't apply as much intensity and focus to his bench accessories as he did the other two because it was a self-fulfilling prophecy that he thought of himself as an okay bencher at best. I don't think Max was ever a true poverty bencher. I think a lot of you would see a lot of his numbers through the years and be like, that's pretty good. I don't know what you're talking about. And Max is a big, strong dude who was training to lift. Just by being a large human that's benching regularly, he'll be able to hit numbers that are pretty decent. That being said, they were not in line with his capabilities on the squat and the deadlift. and it became very much this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? There's a couple other things I'm going to point to here, but I think maybe I also played a role where my bench blew up right away. It was the lift that I excelled at first. And so I think he saw me and be like, that's Sam's lift. I'm better at the other two. And I think that didn't help at all. But he got to the point where he had a massive squat, a massive deadlift, and his bench was not only behind, but it was not progressing at the same rate. So it was on pace to be more behind. And Max realized, hey, I'm a power lifter. That means I'm a total specialist. I'm not a squat specialist. I'm not a deadlift specialist. I am a 3 lift specialist. I should be good. I'm only asked to do 3 things. I should be pretty goddamn good at all 3. So he started taking it more seriously. He came to me and said, Sam, what do I need to do to become better at benching? I don't think this is entirely just you have better bench genetics than I am. I do. What do we need to do to get better at it? And he kind of fell into a twofold trap, right? One is Max had heard the whole, bench, you just need to put on muscle. That's the best way to get up your bench. And taken that too far to where he didn't believe technique was that relevant. And so he had poor technique and he had small pressing muscles because he didn't know how to execute his bodybuilding motions with intensity. He kind of was used to, okay, well, deadlift accessories, we kind of attack our rows, attack our posterior chain, and usually that'll show up in our deadlift. There's not this precision in execution where we necessarily need to target certain muscles, maybe get some mind muscle connection. He didn't have the diet to facilitate the muscle gain. So we kind of came across 2 problems. We were like, okay, well, you're not very good at benching and you have small benching muscles, right? Because his back had gotten pretty good at this, big at this point. His legs had gotten pretty big at this point. All around, again, pretty big dude. But if you looked at him, he had little noodle arms and you're like, that might have something to do with why your bench press is a lagging lift. And realistically, these 2 things should have been addressed at once, but in practical application, we ended up fixing one then the other. And that was first, we were like, okay, let's get you bigger pressing muscles, and that's going to be our means of getting better. So we kind of altered his split to be a little bit more hypertrophy centric on his upper days, trying to develop the 3 primary movers in the delts, the chest, and the triceps. I really kind of got on Max about executing those A with intensity, but B with precision. So we were getting a good stimulus in the gym to grow and really making sure that he applied that same level of effort and intensity that he knew how to do on the other lifts to these smaller, lame upper body accessories that don't necessarily cool. They don't have big tonnages. So then we have this demand for growth. And then the other thing was locking in his diet, getting his protein intake up to 1 gram per pound of body weight, which is around where we chill at now, making sure we have adequate fat sourcing, because at various points, Max has just stopped eating any significant amount of fat and then slept like shit. And they're like, what's going on? And then filling up the rest of his caloric allotment with carbs. Right, so we create this demand in the gym by refining his hypertrophy-focused training in both effort and in execution, and then we go make sure he has the resources. He was always sleeping. That's one thing Max has always done really well, is sleep for 1,000,000 hours a day. So he's got that down. So then we just had to make sure he had the physical building blocks to put on muscle. And lo and behold, the big bastard put on a ridiculous amount of muscle. Max carries more muscle than like any natural dude I've ever met. Nathan Alexander, Big Nate on Instagram, or not Big Nate, Nathan Alexander on Instagram probably comes close as far as natural dudes I've met in person that really carried that much muscle. I think it's only possible because Max carries so much body fat, but he blew up and his bench did follow. But it wasn't progressing in this predictable linear fashion that we were looking for. And that was because he had some noticeable technical deficiencies on the bench, right? And so we're like, okay, well, now we're at least not twofold deficient. We don't have small pressing muscles. We have big pressing muscles now. Awesome. But you're bad at benching, right? And strength is a skill. So that was the next thing we really cracked down on, was we ramped up the specificity of his program. So we started having Max bench 3 days a week and selecting variations that, while they change the emphasis of the musculature, are technically similar enough that he's getting to practice the skill of benching almost verbatim 3 days a week. So he has 1 competition bench day, just having him come in, really focus on his technique. He had a bad habit of dumping the bar into his chest, internally rotating at the shoulder, and then shoving it up, which led to great power off the chest. But because we lost all of our tightness, when we came down, internally rotated, elevated our scaps, trying to scoop back under and go, it led to a really weak mid-range and lockout. So fixing that up, trying to get a more of a true soft touch bench, really focusing on our back tightness, trying to meet the bar halfway. That was kind of the emphasis on the main day. On our secondary day, we wanted to have a day where we shifted the emphasis towards the triceps a little bit. And what we decided to do is, rather than alternate his grip, because that wouldn't allow him to practice his back tightness in the same way, we decided instead we would use accommodating resistance as our means of kind of shifting that muscular emphasis, but letting him practice the bench exactly. So we started using a chain bench. So a very close variation that's going to let him get 100% of that same practice, but also we get a different stimulus, and we also get a different avenue to drive progress. So if Max has a little bit of a dud block on his bench press, but he's able to increase his bench press against chains, so we just have a fixed amount of chains, he uses the same amount every time, and he's able to improve upon the amount of straight weight on the bar, we know that's an increased potential for strength on that main lift. So we have different avenues to drive progression. And then our tertiary day, Max has always had a ridiculously strong overhead press every time he's bothered to train it. So we know shoulder strength is not lagging, and especially guys who will utilize that technique where instead of opening at the pecs to meet the bar, stretching the pecs, loading into them, and then pressing upward, the guys who usually will dump the bar into themselves, internally rotate the shoulder and shove, usually do have strong shoulders. That's why they're favoring utilizing the shoulders within their bench press rather than using the pecs. I don't think this is the best strategy for most people to get a big bench, so we fixed it. But Max has always had really strong shoulders. So on our tertiary day, we're like, okay, well, what would we like to emphasize? Well, we would like to emphasize the pecs, because presumably those are lagging behind his shoulders. We don't need a shoulder-focused bench variation. So we had him do benches on the Yukon bar, which is kind of like a Duffalo bar, but with a little bit more of an aggressive bend, right? So that way he had to focus on not being able to dump it because he had that extra range of motion, really trying to meet the bar halfway, draw his sternum upward, because it would feel egregious if he tried to dump that bar. And this helped us, again, shift muscular emphasis, but on a motion that's so close, he realistically is getting to practice almost exactly as comp bench 3 days a week. So we get to make those technical gains, but we also have these alternate avenues of progress. So again, if he adds 10, 15 pounds to his Yukon bar bench, we perceive that as an increased potential on that main lift, right? So we can have alternate avenues of progression for an advanced lifter who might not be able to eke out a bench PR every single training cycle at his level. So that was kind of the big thing. And then we finished each of those days with a corresponding kind of bodybuilding type workout. I believe the way we wrote it out was bench 1, he would do a competition style bench, and then a upper body workout with a little bit more of a chest emphasis. I believe upper 2, he had bench against chains, and then an upper body workout with more of a tricep emphasis. We found that weighted dips done with a narrow grip were a pretty reliable and good accessory for him, and then just kind of hit a variety of cable exercises to try to pack as much muscle on the back of his arm as possible. And then that tertiary day where we would hit the Yukon bar bench, then we would run through a shoulder focused workout, because while it's a strength, we don't want it to become a weakness. We want to keep our strengths around while we bring up those lagging points. So we figured just training the shoulders seriously once a week will be enough to maintain, if not build a little bit, because he has such a propensity towards strong shoulders. We don't need a ton to keep that around. So what we had him do was just a quick session of a couple work sets of overhead press, then a superset of front raises, lateral raises, and rear delt flies, ending with a little bit of triceps. Each of those pressing days, we end with some triceps. Obviously, a lot more on that tricep-focused day, but I'm a big believer in trying to at least put some of your tricep volume spaced through the week. And that was the approach we took. And the combination of these two things has led to much more predictable progression. At some point, I would like to make a video about his squat, because he's been a good squatter on and off. And one of the big issues we had was a lack of predictability in how that progression would come. He went a year without a squat PR, and then finally all that foundation that he laid down, right, hard training is seldom wasted, he finally capitalized on that, boom, 35-pound PR. And I'm like, that's awesome. So I know our training is doing something, but I would like this to be a little bit more linear and predictable, because for some reason he was failing to execute and express that strength until finally once it clicked. We should also have our training, schedule it in such a way that we can reliably express it, because that is the skill of powerlifting. So at some point I'll make a video kind of talking about what we did and changed on his squat to get that more predictable. But thank you for watching.